I'm Jack Vessey. I was born June 29th, 1922, in a hospital in Minneapolis. I was the oldest of 7 children. My father worked for the Minneapolis, Northfield, and Southern Railroad. If you look at the dates, you'll recall that would put us in the time of the Great Depression. The railroad had a tough time, and so my father had a little seniority and was able to bump other people from when jobs were cut. As a result of that, we moved to Minneapolis in the mid-30s. I wound up going to Roosevelt High School, and where I met my future wife, Avis. She was actually born a day after I was born to Adolph and Cora Funk. Adolph Funk was a streetcar motorman in Minneapolis. His wife, Cora, died when Avis was 4 years old. She had 3 older sisters, so she was sort of shuffled among those sisters for her rearing. We met in high school in the chemistry class. That happened to be in 1940. We were both seniors in high school. It was a leap year. There was a Sadie Hawkins Day party, which was sort of the thing to do. It came from the Al Cap comic strip, and where the women invited the men to come to some sort of celebration. Avis invited me to come to a Sadie Hawkins Day dance, and that's how we met. Avis and I then dated through most of the spring of 1940 until we graduated high school. That summer, for me, involved looking for a job and going to the National Guard summer encampment. And in the fall, Avis enrolled in the university. I had wanted to go to the university, but being a member of the National Guard at that time, we knew we would be activated, so it didn't seem to make sense for me to enroll in the university. And I should take you back, the summer before we met, in the spring of 1939, I enlisted in the Minnesota National Guard. At that time, the war in Europe was just beginning, and of course the war in East Asia had been going on for a couple of years. It's easy in retrospect to say I enlisted for patriotic reasons, but the fact of the matter is I enlisted because it provided a few extra dollars. This is at the height of the Great Depression, and finding a way for a teenager to make $1 or $2 was pretty difficult in those days. Besides that, the National Guard told me they needed somebody that could ride a motorcycle, and I indeed qualified for that. So in the fall of 1940, Avis went on to the university And I got a job at Sears and Roebuck wrapping packages for mailing. We continued to date through that time. There were a few other guys that wanted to date her too, or in fact I suspect there were a lot of them that wanted to, but I had some competition from some other people at that time. In the spring of '41, we were mobilized full-time and moved out of Minnesota and moved to Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. When Pearl Harbor occurred, we were sent immediately to the Gulf of Mexico to patrol the shores of the Gulf of Mexico. Our commander, an ex-Minneapolis cop, Bill Martin, was a smart guy and had a hunch that we would be sent overseas early. So during the month of December, he sent half the outfit on leave for the first 2 weeks of December, and the other half for the second 2 weeks of December. I was in the second half, came home shortly before Christmas. Avis and I had a date for New Year's Eve that year for a dance at the old Nicollet Hotel in Minneapolis. About the 29th or 30th of December, I got a telegram saying return immediately. And I had already bought tickets for this dance, which were, I don't remember what they cost, but in those days they were fairly expensive by the money that a soldier made anyway. And I decided that I would wait until after we went to that dance, and that I would leave on the 1st of January rather than leaving on the last day of December. So indeed, Avis and I went to that dance, and after the dance, she knew I was leaving early the next morning, and she gave me a photograph. It was a great photograph of Avis, and I carried the blown up photograph. I bought a carrier for it in the post exchange, and I in fact carried it in my pack for the whole World War II. Well, I've carried that picture in my pack from the time we left Camp Claiborne until the war ended. World War II packs didn't have a lot of room in it, so the fact of the matter is it took up more room in the pack than most people would have given probably to a picture. But anyway, as you can see, it's a photograph of a beautiful woman, and I showed it off with pride a number of times to people, to friends and comrades during the war. The picture was sort of my firm link to home. We went to North Ireland in early 1942, and then to North Africa in November, December of of 42. Fought through the rest of the Tunisian campaign. Went to Italy in September of 43, shortly after the invasion at Salerno, and stayed there until the end of the war in Italy in May of 1945. So it was 3 long years of carrying that picture in my pack. I got sent home the day the war ended. It was a little tedious getting back to the States from there at that time, but I did get back in late May, I believe it was. And I had 45 days leave, and ostensibly was supposed to go back to my outfit in Italy. Of course, the war with Japan had not ended, and as soon as I got to this country, I was informed by the War Department representatives that I would not go back to my outfit in Italy, that I would be a replacement going to the war in Japan. During that leave, Avis and I did a lot of celebrating, and I did a lot of celebrating with my family that was still at home. It was a great 45-day leave. Avis said we should get married. And looking at having survived the 3 years of World War II and the close calls that I'd had, I wasn't sure that I would make it through another long war session. And I suggested to her that we wait until we were assured that I came back from the war with Japan. And she said very bluntly, if we don't do it now, I probably will not be around waiting for you when you come back. So that changed the picture, and then my next question of her was, where do we apply for a marriage license? We went downtown and bought an engagement ring, and she put it on, and we agreed we'd be married on the 18th of July. Fortunately, the powers that be decided that since I had a battlefield commission, I needed a little more training to be a real officer. So instead of going immediately to Southeast or to East Asia, I was sent to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to attend a 6-week special battery officers course to make me a real artillery second lieutenant. Avis joined me there, and of course, as the history books point out, Harry Truman dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the war with Japan came to an end, so I did not have to go to that part of the war, and we stayed at Fort Sill. In fact, we stayed there until late 1950, after the Korean War had started. By that time, son John had been born, and I was assigned to a newly reconstituted division that was going to Europe. Anyway, it was an interesting and challenging life, and Avis was a wonderful soldier's wife, and I would say that I had that picture around all that time. Avis and I we had a good family. We had 3 good kids, but the 2 of us were joined at the hip. We had a wonderful life together. We had a few ups and downs, but thanks be to God that we were able to work around those, and we had a joyful life. We moved into this house when I retired from active duty in 1985. In fact, the house was built earlier when I had expected to retire in '82, when my term as Vice Chief of the Army was up. But President Reagan selected me to be chairman. So when we finished that job, he asked if there was any last thing we could do and he could do for us, and I said, you could provide us a ride to Brainerd, Minnesota. And he said, okay. So about 3 hours after the retirement ceremony was over, we were in an airplane on the way to Brainerd and spent that first night here. And I remember Ava saying the next morning, she said, do you realize that that was the first night in about 10 years that you didn't receive some sort of a phone call between midnight and 6 a.m.? So we had a wonderful almost 30 years here before she died in April of 2015. And I'm still hanging on to that picture. It sort of represents my hookup with her and the wonderful 75-year romance that the 2 of us had.